Hello, everyone. I'm Liane Jackson, Senior Law Editor at Forbes, and today I am joined by Senator Whitehouse, who will be discussing a lot of issues regarding Supreme Court reform, recent decisions by the court. And first, I just want to say thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us, Senator Whitehouse.
Good to be with you, Liane. Thanks for having me back.
You are well known for your book and the scheme and your observations on the court and the long game that the Republicans have played to quote unquote capture the Supreme Court. There is, of course, a conservative supermajority on the court currently. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about what you're seeing now. I know you have done a lot of conversations and discussions about the scheme that you see still happening. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with the court these days?
Sure, there's been a really considerable move into alignment with my views. The reason I wrote the scheme is that people were not accepting my view that this was a captured court, that special interests had basically moved in and taken over a considerable number of the justices and now controlled the court. So this was the proof. Here's how they did it. Here's all the evidence. It's been out for a few years now, and it has not been taken apart by the other side. If I were making it up, I would think there would have been a really considerable effort to discredit the book. But not only has it stood the test of time, but more and more, the key court watchers have moved into alignment with my views. And now, you look at people like Jane Mayer, Dahlia Lithwick, Ruth Marcus. They are pretty harsh about Jennifer Rubin's, another very good one. They're pretty harsh about this court, and they use language like captured and corrupted. So I think the biggest single thing has been the shift from people thinking, oh, okay, this is a court that just became more conservative, to understanding that that is not true. This is one of the least conservative courts we've ever had. What it is captured and doing very much what it's told by big special interests.
And that is an interesting word that you've been using when you talk about capturing the court, because for a long time, the courts weren't seen as a power source in the government. And now they are at the center of every political aspect, whether it's the executive branch, legislative branch, and the power that they've been wielding is sort of unprecedented. Now, you've talked about the fact like a lot of Democrats and other observers want some sort of Supreme Court reform, but at this point, it is sort of an uphill battle. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities for a binding ethics code? Or even, Representative Ocasio-Cortez had talked about even impeachment. Can you speak about a little bit the options from the progressive side of what can be done to reverse what you guys see as a super conservative court?
Well, super captured court, I would say. The fundamental problem here is that the big interests and the creepy right-wing billionaires who have captured the court are also the biggest funders of the Republican Party. They're the ones behind the big Republican super PACs. If you dig through their efforts to hide their donations, you find them. And there's probably a lot more to be known. So Republicans are not going to take away from their big funding billionaires the prize that they captured of the Supreme Court. So in order to get things done, we're going to need to have some political control in order to pursue legislative and investigative strategies. And I would say two things. The first is that if we win the House has the ability to do really significant investigations, like the January 6th investigation, and to issue subpoenas that the House can enforce so they can get actual testimony from people who were involved in the scheme to capture the court. We've tried that in the Senate, but in the Senate, you can filibuster enforcement of a subpoena. And the Republicans have told the world, don't worry about complying with these subpoenas. We will filibuster enforcement efforts. So that has to be on the House side. And if by chance we win the trifecta, so we have House, Senate, and a president who will sign the bills into law, I think the two key pieces of legislation are the Supreme Court ethics bill, which is very simple and straightforward and aligned with what every other state Supreme Court does, what every other federal court does, and then the term limits bill to begin to refresh the court and decapture it.
So is one of the options potentially to pack the court? That's something you hear about a lot, or are you kind of starting at the basics
I
with
think
ethics?
a lot, a certain amount will depend on where we go with the investigations. When you think of all the horrible stuff we already know about the exotic vacations secretly paid for by billionaires for the justices who rule for them, about the motorhomes with no taxes paid on the big donations to them, the forgiveness of loans, the money being funneled by special interests to the spouses of Supreme Courts, that whole rotten mess is probably just the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot more to find out. And once we have a full case to present to the American people, then I think our legislative aperture opens. But what people are excited about right now is ethics reform, which polls above 75%, and term limits, which polls actually above 80%, in, if you can believe it, a Fox News poll. So those, I think, are the smart places to go where there will be less political pushback and we have more public support and public momentum. And if you actually look closely at my term limits bill, it's retroactive. So the justices that have been on the court for 18 years start cycling out in very short order. And that helps relieve the court of Roberts, Thomas, Alito, and some of the more flagrant captured justices.
Yeah, speaking of the public, is this what do you feel and what do you sense and what do the polls say about the feelings that the public has for the current Supreme Court? It just I've seen it described as sort of a crisis of confidence. Do
Yeah.
you believe that we are in an era where the court has lost a lot of the integrity that this branch of government traditionally had?
Yeah. In pursuit of the wishes and desires of these creepy right wing billionaires, the court has essentially degraded itself and destroyed its own legitimacy and credibility to the point where recently there was a poll that said 60% of Americans disapprove of the Supreme Court. That's a pretty astonishing number when you consider all they have to do is make fair, reasonable decisions. And people tend to like courts. So they've really made a mess of it themselves. The other thing that's interesting is when you ask the public questions, the public is now much more willing to entertain the notion of capture versus conservative. And indeed, they're much more willing to entertain the notion that this is now a corrupt or corrupted court. That was a piece of language that I tried to avoid because I didn't want to scare people away when I first started explaining how the court was captured. But most people now who think about the court don't have any concern about using the word corrupted. And in fact, the women that I mentioned who are the prominent court watchers now, I think every single one of them at one stage or another has used the word corrupt or corrupted. So there's been a huge shift, not only in the numbers of people concerned about the court and the disapproval of it, but also the terminology that is acceptable about what has gone wrong.
And Justice Jackson just days ago mentioned that she was in favor of a binding ethics code and described how the Supreme Court is not above any other court that already has this sort of code or other ethics regulations. Justice Kagan and Sotomayor have said similar things. What is the objection to a sort of a de minimis level having an ethics code for the justices? And what does that say about the temperament of the court for those who object?
Yeah, there is no real or credible objection to this. If you want to look at just 3 data points, every other federal judge other than the 9 Supreme Court justices is subject to review by their judicial peers for ethical misconduct and various forms of sanction, again, by their judicial peers. So there's no reason the Supreme Court shouldn't be treated similarly. Second, every state has its own Supreme Court. And every single state has solved the problem of how you investigate misconduct by Supreme Court justices, often by peers in the judiciary, sometimes by panels that even have private citizens on board. So there's nothing difficult about this. We're 50-0 in Supreme Courts at the state level having this solved. And the third piece is that the Supreme Court itself is already subject to review as to how legitimate its disclosure filings are. And it is reviewed by the Judicial Conference, which is made up of federal judges from the circuit courts of appeal and from the district courts. So the idea that they can't be overseen by lower court judges is already just plain not true. In fact, Justice Thomas has been investigated now twice by the Judicial Conference over his phony baloney disclosure efforts.
So this is an issue that has been ongoing with this court, at least, and a lot of their decisions have sort of not really mirrored what the public polls and the public perception of what is desired comes across. For example, of course, overturning Roe versus Wade, but there's a lot of voting access cases and things like that are before the court currently. I just want to pivot a little bit to most recently in Arizona, where the justices said they put on hold the idea a law that had said that birth certificates are required for voting registration. This is just one example I wanted to bring up of a number of cases that have been very controversial, to say the least, and it's not reflecting public opinion.
Yeah.
What is this one of the biggest issues? In general, the court is, of course, an unelected, it's an undemocratic institution. And
Yeah.
now, are they above the law, above regulation? Is this why there is such a momentum and an effort to sort of rein back, to put in the past, it, I guess, didn't seem to be needed as much, to put some sort
Yeah.
of constraints and codes on a court that is doing a lot that's not reflecting what the public seems to want?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think three things converge into a very dangerous sort of Venn diagram for the court. One is that they're making decisions that nobody wants. And in doing so, they're changing well-established law. The Dobbs decision is a perfect example. Getting rid of the Chevron deference doctrine to administrative agencies is another one. These are doctrines that have been around for decades and decades, had been relied on. Reliance is a big deal in judicial decision making, and they just blew through all that. So you've got the violation of what the public wants. You've got the violation of longstanding norms, a lot of destruction of precedent and previous decisions. And then you've got this very peculiar personal situation of judges basically being provided lifestyles of the rich and famous by right-wing billionaires who, in the other part of their lives, when they're not funding the judicial gifts program, are heavily involved with groups that are out to influence the Supreme Court. These aren't just friends from college. These are people who are personally committed to the institutions that are trying to reshape the court. So the idea that there's no connection between the billionaire gifts program and the billionaire investment in these right-wing judicial influence groups is just nonsense. And you line all those three things up and it looks rotten.
And so you mentioned, if the Democrats were to capture the trifecta, if they got the Senate, the House, and of course the presidency, then there could be more momentum, more movement to Supreme Court reform that a lot of progressives are pushing for. So you were at the DNC. What are your thoughts on, first of all, Vice President Harris and her chances of taking the presidency? I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And then, of course, down the line with the House and the Senate, what can we expect in terms of the Democrats? What's your predictions?
So far, first of all, I think our situation improved dramatically with President Biden's very impressive decision to step back and let Vice President Harris become the nominee. We've seen, I think, a virtually unprecedented historic surge in enthusiasm, volunteers, donations, excitement, and a sharpened, tougher, smarter message out of the campaign as well, which there's a feedback loop there. People see the Harris campaign willing to push back, willing to fight, willing to even drop a little snark. And that cheers them up. because they've seen so much trash unanswered out of the Trump campaign. So I think we're in a pretty good position. I think the Senate's going to be difficult. You know, the key states to watch are going to be Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania. There are others, but I'd say those are the big three. On the other hand, you know, we're starting to look at maybe Florida's in play. Maybe Colin Allred can win in Texas over Ted Cruz. There are other prospects for us out there. So I feel pretty good. I think the House is probably the most likely to go Democrat. I think Harris is almost as likely to win the presidency as the House is to go Democrat. And I think the close one is going to be the Senate. At the moment, I think we win, but never underestimate the power of these creepy billionaires to spend unlimited amounts of money, thanks to Citizens United and the Supreme Court justices who they put on the court, and hide that it's them while they're doing it. So the prospects of a very, very corrupt enterprise in the last now 9 weeks of the campaign run by these billionaires is very real. So nobody should, as a certain person would likely say, this victory is not going to fall out of a coconut tree. We're going to have to go out there and win it.
Yeah, and at the DNC, they had all the signs saying that the Democrats have definitely, as you mentioned, taken a more pugnacious tone, and we fight, we win, or what a lot of the signs say. And
Yeah.
if, you know, if it doesn't go your way, if it doesn't go the way that the Democrats hope, and Trump were to retake the White House, or if some of the houses didn't go in the direction of a majority, is that something, you know, does the fight go on? What's next in terms of the Supreme Court? What's the next battle?
Well, this is the United States of America, and we cannot have a United States Supreme Court that is a tool and plaything of creepy billionaire special interests. That just cannot be. So sooner or later, we're going to have to fix that, and sooner or later, we are going to fix that. But even if, for instance, we were to lose the presidency and you had Trump back in the Oval Office and we lost the Senate, neither can stop the House from investigating. And a really robust, detailed investigation of exactly what has been going on over at the court and how this court capture scheme was played out and who the agents were in the court capture scheme. I think the story, if told fully, becomes so compelling and so horrifying that something will then have to be done.
Great. Yes. So the fight goes on for Supreme Court reform and binding ethics code. But as you mentioned, there is momentum. People are talking about this issue in ways that never occurred before.
Yeah.
So I appreciate all your work that you're doing for the country. And of course, I appreciate you joining me today. Thank you so much, Senator, for your time.
If I could, can I drop in one other thought?
Yes, please.
In addition to the legislative work, we're seeing some real success out of the Judicial Conference, which is the administrative body made up entirely of federal judges that oversees the federal judiciary. And these judges tend also to be the ones who oversee the ethics and discipline processes in their districts and in their circuits. So they know very well that what's been going on at the Supreme Court would be completely intolerable in their own circuits and courts. So they have started to put a lot of pressure on the court. At this point, the final decisions that they've made are 2 for 2 towards reform and transparency. One was to open up the disclosure of who's behind amicus curiae briefs so that the court isn't being bombarded with flotillas of amicus curiae briefs and you don't know who's behind them all. You know, they're orchestrated and coordinated, and nobody knows it because it's all been too secret. They're fixing that rule right now. And then what I call the Scalia trick, which was getting free vacations by having a resort owner send you a personal invitation to stay for free at their resort, and then pretend that because it's a personal invitation, even if it's from somebody you don't know, it's personal hospitality that's being provided and doesn't have to be disclosed. They blew that to smithereens. So there's continuous pressure from within the judiciary on the Supreme Court. And that's another, I think, a compelling part of the story here.
Yeah, it has been an institution cloaked in secrecy in a way that other judges did not have the opportunity or enjoy. So, as you said, the momentum isn't just from the public or the legislature, it's also coming from within their own industry, within the judicial conference, and from other judges. So,
Yes.
um, thank you for pointing that
All
out
right.
as well. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thanks for having me on. Take care.